Yeah, not like now. It's like 50 degrees out. Feels super cold because we've had all that warm weather now.
I know, right? Yeah, no, we had the warm weather and the travel days were the days when we had rain. So
Oh yeah, perfect.
perfect. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. We I had no power for most of yesterday.
Really?
Yeah, I'll show you. You can see it. See that tree back there?
Uh-huh.
It fell on one of the lines up there. See
Oh.
that hole in my fence?
Yes.
That's from that tree.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of Bloomington didn't have power, or parts of Bloomington didn't have power. Um, but because of the way our subdivision was built, like everybody's on different parts of the grid.
Right.
So like at the end of the block, they had power.
Oh, yeah.
We didn't have power in here though, So yeah, it was pretty interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, but anyways, yeah. So yesterday, like now, my whole week is kind of weird because yesterday was all thrown off, and
Sure.
so. But yeah. Anyways, so today we're going to talk about the rib cage. We're going to talk about the rib cage and how the rib cage interacts with the pelvis, the skull, and the shoulders, and talk about like um, the rib cage is a little bit easier to assess virtually than the pelvis because the pelvis can be hard to assess sometimes
Okay.
virtually. So, but we want to look at the rib cage as kind of like the middle child between the head and the pelvis, and it directly impacts our lower back because of the motions that come in tandem with the pelvis. But it also impacts our shoulders and it impacts the way our neck and our skull moves. So, we have like, and the way I look at the rib cage um, is I think about like if I had this guy sticking through the side of my rib cage here, we want to start to think about like the rotation around the axis of like this, right? So when a lot of people think about the rib cage, and we don't really think a lot about the rib cage, right? Like we think about how our head moves, we think about how our pelvis moves, but we don't really think about a lot about how our rib cage moves, you know? So um, and then the other visual that I'll give for assessing the rib cage is the sternum and the bottom of the sternum or the bottom of the breastbone, and kind of like when I talk about the pelvis in this kind of forward and back motion. I talked about the pubic bone and it moving, and we want to think about the bottom of the rib cage kind of doing the same thing, right? So when I drop my sternum on the bottom of my breastbone, when I drop it down, what should happen is that I get kind of like that old man hunch. My shoulders should round forward, my head should come forward, and when I go back, my when I bring it back up and I tilt it up more towards the ceiling, then my shoulders should fall back and my chin should tuck, and I'm getting to this extension. So we've talked about this a little bit in the past, but a lot of people talk about, well, my shoulders are rounded and I need to fix my posture. Well, a lot of that comes along with our head and then the rib cage dropping. And now we have, this is a way over exaggeration, but this is kind of the thing that's going on. Now, when we look at that kind of rounded and shoulders forward, it's no wonder that we can't pick our arms up above our head because our shoulder blades come up. And when our shoulder blades come up, you're running to the, your arm runs into the shoulder blade. Now, everybody wants to talk about the evils of spinal flexion and how terrible it is, right? The problem with that, though, is that for most of the time that we're walking, we're in some form of spinal flexion. So spinal flexion was that terrible, right? Would we do it? No, we wouldn't, right? Just like, if what's terrible is when your shoulder comes out this way, right? We have lots of measures and guards in our body for that to not happen. What's terrible is if you spun your head around in a circle, like 360 degrees, like we think owls do. That doesn't happen. If it does happen, catastrophic things happen to us. So we need this spinal flexion, but we also need this extension. And by and large, what I see with a lot of people with these rounded shoulders is it's because of their shoulders aren't pulled back enough. For a couple of reasons. Some of it could be because their head's too far forward, because their head's not strong enough to keep itself up. And then also sometimes people just lack the mobility here in their rib cage to do things like this. So that'll play into that shoulder flexion, that internal rotation of our shoulders, and then not being able to get our arms above our head. And then when we do try to get our arms above our head, we do all kinds of creative things like, we go here and then we thrust our bottom of the rib cage forward so we can get our arms above our head, right? Without addressing, because now that's the limitation that we have. So the next thing that we want to we look at here is kind of lateral flexion here. And this one is, again, one of those weird things that we don't do a lot as a species. We are terrible at motion in this left to right or east to west plane when we strictly stick in that plane of motion. So if somebody was running at me, I wouldn't turn to the side and go, right? I couldn't get away from a 3-year-old then. I would backpedal a little bit and then turn and go. So we don't get into this lateral flexion very often. And this has a lot of impact on how can have a lot of impact on our low back. Because what will happen oftentimes is when people go to laterally flex, they'll stick their hip out. And this is, this is lateral flexion of the trunk, but it's because we've stuck our hips out and we don't really possess this. The other thing that happens in lateral flexion as well is if you watch my shoulders, you can see as I laterally flex, one comes up, one comes down, right? And then my head and my neck, I have lateral flexion along with that in my neck. I can also get that to happen. We talked a little bit about this last week. When I shift my pelvis or I move my pelvis out to the side here, this happens, right? So, but that's a different thing than the trunk laterally flexing. So those are two different actions there. The more we laterally flex here, the better our shift. The clearer our lateral flexion is here, the better our shift is in our pelvis. And then now there's another. So in the same east to west motion, we can also shift the rib cage over, right? And this is another form of this kind of side to side motion. And I remember when I first started trying to do this, my obliques would cramp up like crazy because I didn't possess the movement. And funny enough, when I do it, it's better now because I've done it a couple times. But the first couple times I did, I could kind of feel myself rotating to the rotating right to try and do it. So, and that happens in that kind of side to side motion, particularly as we're walking forward, right? This kind of shifting lateral flexion of the rib cage happens here, so that we can stay, as Gary calls it, it's off axis, but I'm still within the confines to maintain balance. And then, and that one doesn't have as much interaction with the pelvis and the shoulders as this one does, right? Or as this one does. But it's a little smaller action. And because we do it here, right? We do it here, and we do it here, right? I had to close my eyes because I'm not very good at that one. So we do it in we do it in all of the bigger structures, and then we have rotation of the trunk. Now, when I have people rotate the trunk, it's funny because oftentimes people cannot separate their head from the trunk, or they cannot separate the pelvis. Like they're not aware of it, right? So I'll say rotate your rib cage or your trunk, and they'll go. Only rotate your rib cage. Only rotate your rib cage, right?
Yeah.
Only your rib cage. So they're not aware of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's another one of those motions that we do quite often, but we don't do it in isolation. And I think that if we want to get a clear picture of really what's going on here, we need to do it more in isolation. We need to do all of these motions in isolation. And you can see how one side of so this is walking, right? So when I go to take a step forward, there's my rotation of my trunk or of my rib cage. And we break this way more out when we do the 5-day challenge, because we kind of dedicate the first 3 days to these things and kind of examine them and kind of tie them together. But I wanted to really, I think this one here and shoulder issues, understanding the rib cage and shoulder issues, they go hand in hand. And I think that what happens oftentimes is people will try to separate the shoulders and the rib cage from each other. And then I think it becomes a little bit harder to get a clear picture as to what's going on with the shoulders and the rib cage together. So I know that you've done a little bit of work around this. So do you have any food for thought or pearls of wisdom here on any of this?
First of all, I like your cueing for the movement of the rib cage from the solar plexus, basically.
Yeah.
Because it's so tricky, especially if you have, a rib flare.
Yeah.
It's hard to figure out how to move, where you're moving from in order to achieve it. And that works because otherwise you're just pushing your ribs forward and back that's what I do. I just push them forward and back.
Yeah. So that's a good point. Let me show what you're talking about here, because that's a really good point. So what winds up happening instead of kind of this action or this action is we get this.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Right. So we're there, and that's it. That's to the point of moving around the axis of this thing, right? That's because when I first got back from anatomy and motion, and we did these check-ins, because I basically stole Gary's check-ins. And if he were here, I would tell him that. But like, I had a hard time because what I saw is what you were talking about. People they didn't know how to actually flex and extend their spine, right? So yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up because I thought about that earlier in the day when I was kind of like organizing this in my head and I forgot to say it. So I'm glad that you said something about that.
And then the other thing that I'm realizing is that a lot of my neck and upper shoulder pain and tension is because depending on where my rib cage is, and I'm
Right,
starting to tune into that of when I'm thrusting forward because then it goes right into the neck and then the
right,
shoulder,
right.
wrist, and it's like if I can get it calmed down, then
Yeah,
everything better.
yeah. Marcia and I talked a lot around that in context of restorative movement and also breathing.
Yep.
Right?
Hmm.
Can you create that in that 3D intra-abdominal pressure, and also can you get your breath up high enough
Right. Yep.
without pulling your diaphragm up to your nose?
Hmm.
Right? Can the balloon expand and your rib cage expand, but also get breath up high? And
Yeah.
that's pretty tricky.
Yep. Yeah. To get that breath up into like the second ribs, I mean, way up there is really hard.
Yeah, yeah. Now I'll show it to you. Maybe I'll show it to you next week. So I, I and this could be just my own Neanderthal knuckle dragging dude take on things. Um, but there was a professional MMA fighter. His name is Bas Rutten, and he has this device called the O2 trainer that is an inspiration or in inhalation. Basically, it allows you to progressively overload your inspiration and strengthen all of those your intercostals and your all of your obliques along with your diaphragm. And I think what happens is that we get all of those things stuck down because they get so weak and they're immobile, and then we don't move our rib cage. So and then we're either stuck in kind of that real high guppy breath, or the deep inhalate, kind of sucking in our diaphragm, right, instead of letting it come down.
Hmm.
So I think uh, that's been interesting because I've used his O2 trainer for about a year now, I think, and it's off and on. I'm more off than on now. Um, but I can take that big 3D breath now. And the most interesting thing for me is the way that I recover after high cardio intensive exercise. So like today, I went to jiu-jitsu and did we do 8 or 9 6-minute rounds? And we have a minute break in between the 6 minutes, and then a little bit of like instruction that comes with that as well. So maybe it's like 2 minutes or so, you know. But a 6 to 2 work to rest ratio is not easy, right?
No.
And and we're not like trading you know love taps and tickles, right? Like I'm trying to take my partner down, my partner's trying to take me down, right? Like it's live resistance. And when I used to go through sessions like today, oh my gosh, I would get out of the car after my 20-minute drive home, looking like Elmer Fudd, because everything is so stiff and tight, and my body's so tired. but what I noticed is that as my breathing patterns got better, and this ties back into the rib cage, by the way, right? As my breathing patterns got better, um, I have way less pain. I have way less stiffness after training, and so and I noticed that a little bit when I did stuff when I initially started doing stuff with Marcia. Um, because my breathing got better, and so a lot of my bracing and gripping got better as well. But it didn't it didn't directly address my crazy little psycho niche market of jujitsu, and like having to perform when your heart rate is high, your breathing is high, right? And now you're like sucking wind and getting very little oxygen in, and because of that, your nervous system is spiking, right? Now I get out of class and I feel more like, for lack of a better term, a runner's high than I do, oh my God, I'm dying, right? And I'm able to exert more effort more. I'm able to do that at 50 now, and I wasn't able to do that at 35 to 40, right? So that talks a little bit about more of that, understanding what the rib cage really does and its movements. And we didn't really talk a lot about, we're not addressing movements, breathing directly through it, but it's an important part of the way that a rib cage moves.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. What have you noticed? Because we've talked a little bit about recently about as your T-spine's opening up, you've talked a lot more about shoulder stuff and shoulder stability and shoulder strength, right?
Yep. In fact, it's interesting because I went to see my longtime chiropractor who does applied kinesiology, and he's really, really good. And I haven't seen him in 9 months. And he was amazed that he didn't have to adjust my T-spine because he
Very
always had
cool.
it. So
Yeah,
he was really surprised. I was like, yay.
yeah, yeah. That means that you're making progress, right?
Does, yeah. But the thing with the shoulders is um, with the rib cage thrust, it's like if you're thrusting your ribs and you're pushing overhead, everything's going to hurt.
Yeah,
And so I'm finally getting a little bit more mastery over the ribs so that
yeah,
it doesn't hurt. And then the other thing is that um, I think there was an overemphasis of keeping your shoulder blades down or something. So
yes,
I pull my collarbones down too. Well, they're supposed to move when you go overhead. And if I don't let them move, it doesn't work.
yeah. That's a really good point. So, just to kind of give a visual of what you're talking about too. So, for a lot of people, when they press overhead, because they don't have the strength here, what they'll do is they'll over leverage this
Yep.
to press from here. And then, so when I press above my head, um, this is one of those, I got to close my eyes and put my hand on my collarbone to make sure that I'm not lying. Okay. So yeah, the collarbone, man, we could talk for a while about these two subjects. But the collarbone does this,
Yep.
right? We'll just call it elevation and drop. That's just for lack of a better term, right? Because it acts like a door handle that you have to grab onto, basically, right?
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
So when you're pressing above your head, your collarbone is going to follow the shoulder and the scapula, really, or your shoulder blade, right? And so now it's up,
Yep, it's going
right?
up. Right.
Yeah, it's going up, right? And then as you bring it down, then it drops back down. And then of course, if you really depress your shoulder, then the edge of your collarbone or the end of your collarbone drops down, right? Again, kind of like that door, like a lever door handle, right?
Yep. Yep.
And I think that's a really good way to think about the collarbone is like with that door handle, right? Because now, yes, it rotates forward. Yes, it rotates back. But by and large, most of us, well, first of all, most of us probably aren't aware of that. Because again, it's this bone that the only reason that you know is there is if you break it.
Yeah.
Right? Now, after I got back from anatomy in motion, I started mobilizing the collarbone. And I was surprised at how much I could clear up with people, like especially AC joint separations. Because now they don't want to do this. Well, one of the best ways to get your collarbone to move is in this kind of in frontal plane. I'm trying to not use that term because nobody knows what the hell it is, but in
Right.
frontal plane, right? So my collarbone is going to come up now above my head, and then as I bring it back out, it drops back down. So it's rotating like that door, the door handle. So yeah, and what happens, and this is old programming for us, right? In that we need to have our shoulders back and
Yep.
down,
Yep.
right?
Exactly.
And that's not true. We actually need to have a little elevation on our shoulders,
Yeah. You
right?
do. No.
Yeah. Um, and when you look at that idea of back and down, and then you look at how much uh, issues that people have with carpal tunnel, that have with numbness and tingling in their fingers. Well, that's because you're basically stretching the nerve and pissing it off all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then your collarbone's not going to move. So I wonder why, if you go here and you try and bring your arm above your head and don't let your collarbone move, why would your shoulders not want to move? Because you've stuck them down and back,
Right.
you
Right.
know? And look, I'm just as guilty as anybody else is. I told people for a long time, oh, you shouldn't do any shrugging motions, right? Shouldn't develop your upper traps because they're too tight. It's making your neck problems worse. No, that's not really true, right? Just like my wife's niece has headaches and migraine problems, and she's done everything under the sun imaginable. And we've talked a little bit about it. I love Mal a lot. She's great, but I don't want her as a client. Um, I love her. She's fantastic, but I would have no eyebrows because I would pull them all out. And so, but I was telling her, I'm like, you want a thick, strong neck. I know that's not what women tell you in their beauty standards, right? But you want a thick, strong neck because it builds all of this stability and will help to get around a lot of, most likely she probably has a pretty decent cervical hinge, right? And that's probably where her migraines and headaches are coming from. Now, magically enough, if and when she does take a muscle relaxer or she gets a shot, those things go away. Well, what would happen if your head actually carried fine and you were like this mashing on all your nerves or like this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, just doing that hurts my neck.
I know.
So yeah, all of those things kind of go hand in hand. Which next week as well, we'll talk about the neck more. We'll talk about the neck next week. And maybe we'll touch a little bit more on the shoulders and the collarbones as well, just as kind of a tie into that. In some things to think about. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty. I I never thought about the rib cage and what it did until I took anatomy of motion. And then when I was working with pictures, oh my gosh, when I watch a picture, I can almost tell you what the rest of their arm mechanics looks like based on where their what happens with their rib cage or their trunk as they're coming down the mound.
Okay.
Guys will get really, they get what they'll call, their arm will get really long and whippy as they get into leg lift and as they're coming down the mound, because they're not really strong here, then they try to slow themselves down. Because this is how we slow ourselves down. Or this is how we coil to get collar. Right? So and then what happens is as they get more like this, they get into more internal rotation. And they actually need a ton of external rotation as they're starting to hit front foot. As they're starting to hit front foot, their trunk should be big, their arms should be coming back, so that when their center of mass comes forward, then like it's almost like this catapulting action happens. Because then the internal rotation happens naturally. They get, and then because they land front foot and they'll land with some knee flexion, and the knee pushes back I can't do it in conjunction because I'm not moving fast enough, but the knee pushes back as the trunk comes forward, and that's what releases into that internal rotation. Well, if they're not able to get into that external rotation and their trunk isn't nice and tall, then what winds up happening is their arm starts to get into weird angles, and that's where you have all the shoulder and elbow issues.
Okay.
So now I know that you were going to go out and have a pitching conference later tonight after you were done here. So I was just helping you out with that.
Thank you.
So yeah, but that's where I really learned a lot about it functionally as I was starting to work with the guys.
Okay.
Because I started to look at like, okay, well, and I would have them do it. I'm like, okay, I want you to do this and get into external rotation. If you can get into external rotation without moving your rib cage, they'll give you $1 million, right? Because it's not possible to do unless you just have the tendon and ligament, integrity of a fish. You're just not going to be able to do it.
Right.
So, yeah. So, but yeah. So next week we'll talk a little bit more about shoulders. We'll talk a little bit more about clavicle, right?
Yeah.
And then we'll talk about the neck and the skull and the one of the things I really enjoyed about like looking at pelvis, rib cage, and skull. And I was talking to Jerry about this earlier. So we don't when we look at our big dumb human brains, we can't segment out what our vertebrae are doing. It's not possible. You can segment out what large parts of your vertebrae does, but you couldn't just sit there and rotate one vertebrae. Like you can rotate the ones that are supposed to rotate, that are big rotators, but I couldn't rotate my L3 on its own to save my life.
Yeah.
Right? So now when we look at the pelvis, rib cage, and skull, because they're big structures, our brain can grab a hold of that, and then we can start to learn a lot about how our body is functioning because of that. Because they're big, bony, hard structures, right? Just like you can't only move this part of your finger, right? You can move this part. You can move your finger like this,
Yep.
but you like, right? You can't do it. And so, yeah. So that's what I thought was pretty interesting about pelvis, rib cage, and skull. So, okay, Sonia, we've made it another 30 minutes.
All right. Thanks, Sean. That was
Yep.
very interesting. Very
Yep.
helpful.
Good. All right. Well, I will chat with you next week. Have a great week. Thanks.
You too. Bye-bye.
Yep, bye-bye.